The Architect of Shadows. Chapter 1. The Foundation. John Harlan had always moved quietly through the world, like a man walking on the far side of a riverbank, watching the current without ever stepping in. At 42, he still carried the deliberate calm of someone who had learned early that noise rarely won anything worth having. His days were measured in small, precise actions: waking at 5 to check overnight markets, brewing coffee strong enough to cut through the fog of another sleepless night, then settling into the small office he'd carved out of the basement of their craftsman home in Palo Alto. The inheritance had come unexpectedly 15 years earlier, a modest sum from an aunt he'd barely known, just under $200,000 after taxes. Most people would have bought a boat or paid off a mortgage. John had opened a brokerage account and begun studying, not with the frantic energy of a gambler, but with the patience of a gardener planting seeds he might not live to see fruit. He started with index funds, safe and boring. Then dividend aristocrats. Then, cautiously, individual stocks. By 2010, he discovered Bitcoin through a forum post on Reddit and bought his first fraction at $8. He never told anyone, not even Sarah. Not because he distrusted her. Back then, he hadn't learned to distrust anyone, but because money felt like something private, almost embarrassing, like discussing your bowel movements at dinner. Sarah was different. Sarah burned. At 28 when they met, she'd been working 70-hour weeks at a failing startup, coming home with eyes bloodshot from staring at code, talking about disrupting things John barely understood. He'd loved her intensity immediately. The way she could make a pitch deck sound like poetry. When she quit to start her own company, Neuralink Solutions, an AI-driven mental health platform, he'd supported her without hesitation. "You are going to change the world," he'd told her the night she incorporated. She'd laughed, kissed him hard, and said, "We are." But it had never been we, not really. John had taken over everything else so Sarah could focus. The cooking, the cleaning, the endless school runs when their daughter Emily was born. He'd become the invisible infrastructure of their life together, the quiet engine that kept everything running while Sarah stood in the spotlight. The money flowed steadily. His investments grew through compound interest and careful timing, selling Bitcoin at peaks, buying during crashes, moving into Ethereum when it was still cheap. Every gain went into their joint accounts. Every bonus from his part-time consulting work. Every dollar from the small online courses he'd created about personal finance, sold under a pseudonym because Sarah thought it was cute but embarrassing. Sarah never asked where the money came from. She just used it. First, it was seed money for servers. Then, office space. Then, hiring her first employees. John watched the balances drop and replenish them quietly, selling positions at exactly the right moments. By 2018, he'd built something extraordinary, nearly $8 million across various accounts, all joint, all accessible to Sarah for busyness expenses. She'd taken it all without ever realizing what it represented. 15 years of discipline, 15 years of watching charts at 3 a.m. while she slept, 15 years of saying no to vacations, new cars, everything that might have distracted from the long game. Their daughter Emily grew up thinking her father was just good with money. Sarah encouraged this narrative. In interviews, when asked about her success, she'd say things like, "I built this company from nothing with grit and determination." Or, "As a woman in tech, I've had to fight for every opportunity." John never corrected her. He told himself it didn't matter who got the credit. What mattered was that Sarah was happy, that Emily had everything she needed, that their life worked. The first crack appeared in 2020 during lockdown. Sarah had been featured on the cover of Forbes' 30 Under 30 issue. The headline read, "Sarah Harlan, the self-made queen of mental health tech." John had bought 20 copies. He'd left one on the kitchen counter with a post. It that said, "So proud of you. Sarah had barely glanced at it. "They got my age wrong," she'd muttered. "Makes me look older." That night, John had gone down to his office and stared at the portfolio statements. $8 million. Every dollar earned through his choices, his research, his patience. All of it had gone into Neuralink Solutions. All of it had become Sarah's success story. He'd closed the laptop and told himself it was enough to have built something real. That love meant giving without keeping score. But something had shifted that night. Something small and hard had begun to form in his chest, like a pearl starting from a grain of sand. Chapter 2. The Ascent. By 2023. Neuralink Solutions was valued at $2 billion. Sarah appeared on magazine covers monthly. Time called her the empathy entrepreneur. Vogue did a spread titled Power Dressing: How Sarah Harlan Conquered Silicon Valley in Stilettos. She gave TED Talks about resilience and female empowerment, always with the same carefully crafted origin story. Poor kid from a broken home, who'd pulled herself up through sheer will. John watched from the audience sometimes, standing in the back because he hated the spotlight. He'd smile when she smiled, clap when everyone else clapped. Emily, now 12, would sit beside him rolling her eyes at her mother's dramatic pauses. The venture capitalist entered their lives in 2024. Mark Vandenberg was everything. John wasn't tall, loud, impossibly confident. 45 years old, with the kind of face that suggested expensive dermatologists and good genes. He'd made his fortune early in social media and now sat on boards, invested in disruptive companies, and collected beautiful women the way other men collected watches. He invested $50 million in Neuralink's Series C round. Sarah called it transformative. John met him at a company party in their backyard. Mark had shaken his hand with the kind of grip that asserted dominance, looked him up and down, and said, "So you are the lucky guy who gets to go home with her every night." John had smiled politely. "Yes. For 15 years now." Mark had laughed like this was hilarious. After that, Mark was everywhere. At board meetings, Sarah brought him too for advice. At industry events, where he'd have his hand on the small of her back while introducing her as the future of tech. At their house for strategy sessions that lasted until 2 a.m., John noticed the changes gradually. Sarah started dressing differently, more expensively, more provocatively for someone who claimed to hate the male gaze. She stopped asking about his day, stopped noticing when he made her favorite dinner, started sleeping with her phone face down, which she'd never done before. The first time he suspected something physical was in Aspen during a company retreat. He'd woken up at 3 a.m. to find Sarah's side of the bed empty. Through the window, he'd seen them on the deck below, Mark's arm around her waist, her head thrown back laughing at something. He'd whispered. John had stood there for a long time, watching. Then he'd gone back to bed and stared at the ceiling until morning. He told himself it was nothing, that he was being paranoid, that 15 years of building something together couldn't be destroyed by a midlife crisis and a charming asshole with too much money. But the pearl in his chest had grown larger. He started documenting everything. Not with any clear plan, just a habit born of 15 years of meticulous record keeping. He gathered statements showing every transfer from investment accounts to joint accounts to Neuralink, every wire transfer, every check written for business development. He organized them chronologically, created spreadsheets tracking exactly how much of his money had gone into each funding round. It became his nighttime ritual. While Sarah worked late or had meetings, John sat in his basement office, building his archive, the evidence of what he'd actually contributed, the truth beneath the myth. Sometimes he'd look at photos from their early years. Sarah pregnant with Emily, both of them exhausted and happy in their tiny apartment. He'd wonder how they'd gotten here, when exactly she'd stopped seeing him. The Entrepreneur of the Year award was announced in September 2025. Sarah would be honored at a gala in New York in December. The press release called her a beacon for women in technology everywhere and a truly self-made success story. John read it in his office and felt something snap quietly inside him. Not rage, exactly. Something colder, cleaner. He booked his own flight to New York, separate from Sarah's. She didn't notice. He was, after all, just the supportive husband who handled details. Chapter 3. The Discovery. John found the messages on a Tuesday in November. Sarah had left her laptop open in the kitchen, a rare occurrence. She'd gone upstairs to take a call, something about damage control with a journalist. John had been making coffee when he saw the screen. The messaging app was open. The conversation was with Mark. He shouldn't have read it. He knew that even as he started scrolling, the messages went back months. Started professional, became personal, then explicit. I can't stop thinking about last night. You are going to kill me wearing that dress to the gala. Tell your husband you are staying in the city an extra night. I booked the penthouse at the Mandarin. There were photos, videos, plans for after the divorce, because of course they discussed divorce. Mark had opinions about prenups. None existed. Their assets were all joint. About how Sarah would obviously get primary custody because John was just a stay, at-home dad. About how they'd build something new together. John read everything. Twice. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and stared at nothing for a long time. When Sarah came downstairs, he was making eggs. "Everything okay?" she asked, barely looking at him. "Fine," he said. His voice sounded normal. "Big day." "Always," she laughed, grabbing her laptop. "Mark thinks the Times piece is going to be huge." John watched her leave without kissing him goodbye. She hadn't done that in years. That night he finished organizing his documentation. Every dollar traced. Every transfer documented. Every investment statement showing growth from his original inheritance and earnings. He had 15 years of evidence that Neuralink Solutions had been built entirely on his money. His money funneled through joint accounts that Sarah had used while telling the world she'd built everything herself. He made copies, digital and physical, sent encrypted backups to a lawyer he'd consulted quietly months earlier when the pearl had first started growing. Then he waited. The gala was 3 weeks away. Sarah was practicing her acceptance speech in the mirror, talking about resilience and overcoming obstacles and being a role model for young women. John listened from the hallway and felt nothing but cold clarity. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The gala was everything Sarah had dreamed of. Black tie, crystal chandeliers, tech titans and politicians and celebrities, all gathered to celebrate her. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel glittered with wealth and ambition. Sarah wore a custom gown in emerald green. Mark stood beside her on the red carpet, his hand possessive on her waist while photographers shouted her name. John arrived separately, wore the same tuxedo he'd worn to their wedding. No one recognized him. Why would they? He was just the husband. He found his table near the back, watched Sarah accept her award with tears in her eyes, talking about her journey from nothing to everything, about how she'd done it all herself, despite every obstacle. "Thank you," she said, voice breaking artfully, "for seeing me, for believing in what one determined woman can accomplish." The applause was thunderous. John waited until dessert was served. Then he stood up and walked to the podium. Security started moving, but someone recognized him. That is her husband, and they hesitated. Sarah saw him coming. Her smile faltered. "Jan," she said into the microphone. "Honey, what are you?" He reached the stage, took the microphone from her hand gently, like passing a baton. "I just wanted to say a few words," he said calmly, "about my wife's extraordinary success." The room quieted. This wasn't in the program. Sarah has done something remarkable, John continued. She has built a $2 billion company that helps millions of people with their mental health. She is on magazine covers. She is Entrepreneur of the Year, and she has done it all while maintaining the narrative that she built everything from nothing alone. He paused. Let that sink in. But that is not quite true. He pulled out his phone, connected to the venue's projector system. Someone on staff had helped him earlier, curious about what Sarah Harlan's husbands wanted to show. The first slide appeared, a bank statement from 2010 showing the initial inheritance deposit. This is where it started, John said. My inheritance. Every dollar that built Neuralink came from investments I made over 15 years. Every seed round, every server purchase, every salary paid to employees, all of it traceable to money I earned and grew. More slides, transfer records, investment growth charts. Emails from Sarah requesting funds for busyness expenses. The room had gone completely silent. Sarah has spent years telling the world she was self-made, John said quietly. That she built this from nothing. But nothing isn't $8 million carefully invested over 15 years while raising a child and managing a household so your spouse can focus on her dream. Sarah had gone white. John, please. I supported you, he continued, not looking at her. Every step, I believed in you. I gave everything without asking for credit because I thought that is what love was. But love isn't being erased. Love isn't watching someone build their entire identity on a lie that makes you invisible. He turned to her then. And love definitely isn't discovering your wife is planning to leave you for her investor lover the moment her award season is over. Gasps rippled through the crowd. John put the microphone down, walked off stage, left the building. By morning, the video was everywhere. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The collapse was swift and total. Investors demanded audits. The SEC got involved. Joint accounts used for business expenses without proper disclosure raised questions about financial transparency. Board members resigned. Major clients pulled contracts, citing reputational risk. Mark Vandenberg issued a statement saying he'd ended his professional relationship with Neuralink and Sarah personally. Within days, he was photographed with a 28-year-old model in St. Bart's. Sarah tried to fight. Hired crisis PR firms. Gave tearful interviews about complicated marriages and personal growth. But the evidence was overwhelming. Every dollar traced back to John's investments. Every claim of being self-made exposed as carefully curated fiction. The company filed for bankruptcy protection in February 2020. 6. Sarah moved into a small apartment in San Francisco, stopped answering calls from journalists. Emily chose to live with John full-time. John sold the house, moved with Emily to Portland, where nobody knew their story. He took up woodworking, started teaching personal finance classes at the community center under his real name for the first time. Sarah reached out once. 6 months later, left a voicemail asking if they could talk. About Emily, about healing. John didn't call back. Sometimes late at night, he'd think about the gala, about Sarah's face when the truth hit, about the satisfaction that had lasted exactly 3 days before being replaced by something hollow. He'd built something extraordinary once, given it away freely, watched it become someone else's triumph. Then he'd taken it back. But taking it back hadn't given him anything new, just returned him to where he'd started. Older and quieter and alone with his daughter, who sometimes looked at him with questions she was too young to ask. Revenge, he learned, was like radiation, effective at killing the tumor, but leaving the surrounding tissue damaged forever. One evening in spring, Emily asked him why he'd done it. Not angrily, just curious, John thought for a long time. Because I wanted to be seen, he said finally. Just once. Emily nodded like she understood, though she couldn't possibly. Later, John stood on his new porch, watching the sunset over the Willamette River. The light was soft and golden, the kind that made everything look momentarily perfect. He thought about Sarah somewhere across the distance, probably hating him. Thought about Mark moving on to his next conquest. Thought about all the people who'd applauded her myth and now condemned her fall. None of it felt like victory, just the quiet aftermath of having finally spoken a truth that nobody, in the end, had wanted to hear, including himself.